My mother saw me and my father being intimate. Hi everyone, my name is Kelly and I'm 20 years old. Today I want to share a story with you, a story I once swore I would never reveal, one I intended to bury forever. The most painful part is that I am the one to blame in this tale. It feels like something straight out of a movie, almost too unbelievable to be real, yet it happened in my own life. No matter how much I wish to forget, the events remain etched in my memory, haunting me every single day. I fear I'll never be able to undo my mistakes or reconcile with the person I hurt so deeply. The damage I caused wasn't just emotional, it broke trust in ways that seemed irreparable. Despite all my efforts, I cannot erase what I've done. I'm a young, beautiful girl living with my parents in the suburbs of San Diego, California, a serene and picturesque place. My father, Roger, is the proud owner of a well-known seafood restaurant that has gained a fantastic reputation in the area. He takes exceptional care of his body and enjoys hitting the gym regularly. As a result, even though he is 51 years old, his physique remains toned and strong, making him look significantly younger than his actual age. He possesses a strong and decisive personality, yet he is always gentle and kind to me, balancing strength with warmth. Meanwhile, my mother, Julissa, works as a history teacher at the high school located just a short distance from our home. She is consistently gentle and delicate in her demeanor, with a deep passion for history and a love for studying significant historical events. Each night, she often sits by the window, engrossed in reading books under the soft, warm light, never forgetting to offer me valuable advice and shower me with her deep affection. My mother is the one who has instilled in me the importance of living sincerely and embracing my emotions. From my childhood through to my adulthood, I have always been enveloped in the love of both of my parents, who have devoted their hearts and souls to caring for and protecting me in every possible way. When I was a child, every single time my father came home from work, I would dash toward him with pure excitement, throwing myself into his warm embrace. My small arms would wrap around his neck as I hugged him tightly, feeling a sense of joy and safety. To me, my father represented the safest and most secure place in the world. It was as if being in his arms could make all my worries disappear. I didn't think too much about it. I simply basked in the feeling of being safe and deeply loved. I was also a spirited girl who adored fresh and beautiful things, always drawn to vibrant colors and lovely designs. I often picked out the most stunning and gorgeous dresses I could find for myself. Each time I did, I would run excitedly to my parents, twirled around a few times, and eagerly wait for their compliments. Because they loved me unconditionally, my parents would always smile brightly, showering me with praise and admiration, their eyes sparkling with pride. Those compliments, while simple, filled my heart with joy and made me feel like the happiest girl in the entire world. Following each dinner, when the family gathered around the TV, I used to sit on my father's lap. He would hold me in his arms, his hugs always tender and comforting. I grew up surrounded by that affection, so much so that it became a difficult habit to let go of. Even as I got older, I continued sitting on his lap, just like when I was a child, as though I were still a little girl seeking love and protection in his secure embrace. For me, that habit was a cherished bond, a simple joy I never wanted to give up. However, lately, whenever I sat on his lap or ran to hug him, the feeling wasn't the same as it used to be. I couldn't help but observe that my dad's reaction was odd in some manner. He no longer readily welcomed my hugs as he used to. There was a hesitation instead. His arms would occasionally get a bit tighter than normal. Even my father's gaze on me had also changed. It no longer conveyed the tenderness and warmth of a father's love for his child. There were moments when I could distinctly sense the bewilderment in his eyes, as though he was concealing something beyond my comprehension. During those times, my heart would race, almost as if my instincts were signaling to me that something was amiss. Yet, I refused to accept it. Perhaps I'm overthinking. Perhaps it's merely a fleeting sensation. Regardless, this peculiar feeling lingers, leaving me convinced that things are no longer as straightforward as they once were. As I've mentioned, my father enjoys staying active. Despite his age, he still maintains a robust and impressive physique, reminiscent of his youth. He's not just my father, but also a symbol of strength and charisma that I've always looked up to. Whenever I look at my dad, I can't help but notice how handsome he still is, with his broad shoulders and well-toned physique. Every time he passes by, I feel a deep fondness for him, a weird emotion that's hard to put into words. Perhaps it's the confidence he carries, or the strong, protective image that takes me back to my childhood when he was my entire world. However, recently, this feeling has shifted. It's no longer just the admiration a daughter feels for her father, but something more vague and hard to describe. I catch myself gazing at him longer than usual, and when I'm near him, an unfamiliar sensation stirs within me, something that even I thought was out of the ordinary. Then one day, as regular, I returned home from school to find my father already there. He always got home earlier than my mother and would typically sit on the sofa, his eyes fixed on the TV screen. When I walked through the door, I saw him sitting in his usual spot, calm and familiar. Without thinking twice, despite being grown up, I ran to him, feeling as though it was the most natural thing in the world. I jumped onto his lap, just like I used to as a child, without a moment's hesitation. Dad embraced me warmly, as he always had. But this time, something felt different. The hug was still comforting, but the atmosphere between us had shifted, leaving me slightly uneasy. I tried to dismiss the feeling, convincing myself it was all in my head. However, it wasn't just a fleeting thought. I became aware of something touching me as I sat on his lap. Initially, I attempted to dismiss it, convincing myself it was just the awkward position I was sitting in, or perhaps something in his pocket. However, as time went on, it became impossible to ignore, like an undeniable presence. My heart began to race, and the atmosphere shifted, feeling strangely tense and suffocating. I felt out of place, unsure of how to react. The closeness that had once brought me comfort now made me feel uneasy and unsettled. I sat still, attempting to stay calm, but a series of unanswered questions within me kept coming up. Dad's eyes carried a quiet shyness, much like my own. Nobody of us spoke, the air thick with unease, until Mom entered abruptly, cutting through the tension. I wanted to rise, but my legs felt as though they were anchored, refusing to move. Dad remained wordless, his gaze fixed on me, yet the familiar warmth I once knew in his eyes seemed absent. Then the sound of the door opening echoed sharply. Mom stepped in, shattering the oppressive stillness. Instinctively, we both averted our gazes, and I hurried to my feet, trying to appear composed. Yet the strange, heavy feeling lingered, an unshakable weight on my chest, as if something precious had been irreparably altered. Outwardly, everything seemed unchanged, but deep inside I could feel the undeniable shift. My dad appeared to begin showing a greater interest in me than he ever had before. He often asked about my life, paying attention to the little details that he had previously overlooked. He began buying me new clothes and various items, gifts that I hadn't even requested. At first, these presents confused me, leaving me unsure of his intentions. But gradually, I came to realize that this care felt different. It was not the typical fatherly love I had known. Each time he did something like this, I couldn't shake the strange feeling that was developing within me. It felt as though we were transitioning into something more like a couple, rather than maintaining the usual father-daughter relationship. The emotional distance between my father and me was not merely physical. It became apparent in the way his gaze often seemed distant and detached. The moments of silence between us stretched longer than they ever had before, creating an uncomfortable tension in the air. I sensed that something significant was changing in the atmosphere between us, but I didn't know how to confront or address it, except that there was something I couldn't get at. Then, one day, a day that would mark the true breaking of the boundary between my father and me, I experienced a moment that I will never forget. It was a pivotal point that altered everything. That day, my mom had to leave for a business trip arranged by the school, leaving just my father and me at home. Returning from school, I stepped into the house and was greeted by an entirely unexpected sight. On the dining table, my father had laid out a lavish dinner. The atmosphere in the house felt different, almost a touch romantic. The aroma of the food was mouth-watering, and most notably, 2 bottles of red wine were already set on the table. I couldn't hide my astonishment. My eyes widened as I glanced at my dad and chuckled. "What's made you so thoughtful today?" At the time, I simply saw it as a delightful surprise, never suspecting there might be more to it. My dad, wearing his usual warm smile, responded that he had something wonderful to share from the restaurant, something successful that he wanted to celebrate with me. I felt a surge of happiness and chose not to ask any further questions. All I wanted was to enjoy this special dinner with my father. We settled at the table, sharing a meal and drinks together. The wine flowed smoothly into our glasses, and the soft glow of the candlelight created an atmosphere that felt warmer and more intimate than ever before. At that moment, I didn't sense anything amiss. Everything felt perfectly normal and reassuringly familiar. Yet, within this closeness, a new feeling began to emerge, one that I struggled to articulate. As we ate and shared our thoughts, we reminisced about stories from my childhood, when I was the little girl who would always cling to my father for comfort. Those sweet memories, along with our little inside jokes, filled the air with laughter, making it seem as if all the tension and uncertainty that had existed before had simply melted away, leaving us in a blissful state of connection and joy. Laughter filled the cozy room, creating an atmosphere between us that felt closer and more intimate than it had ever been before. After finishing 2 bottles of wine, I started to feel inebriated. My mind became foggy, and the drink seemed to blur my sense of reason and reality. We found ourselves sitting closer together, and I couldn't tell if it was the alcohol influencing my thoughts or something else entirely, but suddenly, a question slipped out of my mouth. One I had never imagined I would ask. "Do you like me?" I inquired, my voice soft and gentle, but it no longer carried the innocent tone of a child speaking to her father. That question was not a simple, naive inquiry. Instead, it held a much deeper significance, as if I was approaching the topic from a completely different perspective. It was a viewpoint that my sober mind would have never permitted me to express openly or even think. My dad was quiet for a while, then, as though he were studying something within me, he turned to face me with attentive, profound eyes. With a warm voice, he said, "Yes." It was a single word, yet it was profound and loaded with connotations. We both exchanged glances. The room appeared to freeze at that moment. There was a new bond between us, one that went beyond anything I had ever experienced. Instead of the intimacy of father and kid, I have no idea what motivated me at the time. It may have been the booze. Perhaps the feelings that had been repressed for so long were the cause. Without uttering a word, I softly reached out and embraced my father's neck. An unusual sensation swept over me, but I didn't stop or think any further. All I knew was that, in that moment, I couldn't control myself. My dad hesitated briefly, but then he reciprocated my hug, his arms encircling my waist and holding me tighter. The space between us vanished. We gazed into each other's eyes for a long while, as if no words were necessary. We seemed to understand each other's unspoken thoughts. We kissed each other slowly and cautiously at first, as if rediscovering a familiar tenderness. However, after a few seconds, the hesitation faded. replaced by an intense, overwhelming feeling. Our hugs grew tighter and tighter, not just to get closer, but as if we wanted to hold on to this moment forever. My heart was racing in my chest, and I felt the warmth of my father's body, making everything else disappear. My dad started to gently touch my back, his hand uncovering every line, every breath. He traced the line of my wound. The first tenderness we shared gradually transformed into longing caresses, as if my father found himself unable to control the growing desire that was building between us. His fingers glided over every part of my body, moving with a mix of caution and greed, as if he wanted to explore every inch without missing a single detail. Each touch and every gesture sent shivers down my spine, as if my skin instinctively knew how to respond to his every movement. My father lifted me up gently yet firmly, his strong arms enveloping me tightly, as if he were afraid to let go. I wrapped my arms around his neck, feeling the intensity of our connection as we both breathed rapidly, our breaths mingling in the charged atmosphere. It was a moment that felt both exhilarating and overwhelming, filled with emotions I could hardly comprehend. My dad strode confidently, guiding me into the dimly lit room where only faint light from outside seeped in. In that moment, nothing else mattered, neither time nor space. Only the bond between us, as though the world had come to a standstill. All thoughts faded away, leaving behind an overwhelming sense of longing and an indescribable connection. He gently placed me on the bed, and our lips met once more, fusing in tender yet fervent kisses, as if we were inseparable. I could feel his warm breath mingling with the rapid pounding of my heart. His hands moved skillfully, slowly unfastening my shirt. With each touch and every button was undone, the sensation of exposure grew, not just from the removal of clothing, but from the raw vulnerability we were unveiling. That vulnerability made my heart tighten, yet, at the same time, all hesitation gradually melted away. That night, we held nothing back. Every hurdle, every hesitation crumbled, as if the universe had narrowed down to just the two of us. Every movement, every touch carried profound significance, as though we sought to etch each other's essence into our souls and bodies. We shared everything, not just physical closeness, but a merging of emotions and long-hidden desires finally set free. At that moment, we both realized that all boundaries had vanished, leaving only the pure presence of one another. The following day, when my mom came back home, everything seemed to fall back into its usual rhythm. My father and I carried on as though nothing out of the ordinary had occurred the night before. We both smiled and chatted with ease, acting completely normal, as if the events of the previous evening were a distant memory, or perhaps had never happened at all. My mother appeared unaware of any shift in the atmosphere. Life resumed its ordinary flow. We sat together at breakfast, discussing the usual mundane topics that a typical family would. Yet, beneath the surface, I was acutely aware of an unspoken truth. My father and I knew exactly what had taken place, even as we maintained our outwardly casual demeanor. A quiet, oppressive weight settled between us, despite the light-hearted facade we presented. Every glance, every seemingly innocent gesture carried a deeper meaning, a silent understanding of the shared secret we now bore. It was a secret that bound us together in a way no one else could ever understand or discover. Though we were fully aware of how wrong it was, we made no effort to put a stop to it. Instead, our interactions became more clandestine, hurried, and fraught with tension, feeding the inner turmoil that brewed between guilt and desire. Each furtive meeting intensified the conflict within us, yet neither of us could bring ourselves to pull away. Every touch, every lingering look seemed to speak volumes, silently affirming that we would continue, without words, without promises, and without restraint. Then one evening, while my mother was completely sleeping, my dad crept silently into my room without making a noise. I remained in a deep slumber, completely oblivious to the fact that my father had lay beside me, his arms wrapped around me. I woke up to an unfamiliar warmth enveloping me, and it startled me. Turning my head slightly, I saw his familiar face close by. A fleeting moment of surprise washed over me before a soft smile formed on my lips, and I wrapped my arms gently around my father. In that instant, the world around me faded away, leaving just the two of us. "Careful, Dad. Be quiet. Mom might hear," I whispered, my voice trembling like a cold breeze slipping through a door's narrow crack. Each word felt heavy, as though I was trying to suppress something overwhelming within me that threatened to break free. My throat tightened, but my heart pounded erratically in my chest. Without realizing it, my hands gripped the blanket tighter, as if trying to steady the tremors coursing through me. My breathing had become erratic and irregular, as though some unseen fear was preventing me from breathing. The room was oddly still, and even the smallest movement or sound, like a whisper, made my pulse race because I was terrified that everyone would learn about our daring love and all we had worked so hard to conceal. Over time, my dread of being found turned into an obsession. Yet I was unable to refuse. Every time Dad arrived, I recognized that I was trapped in this relationship, unable to break free, despite knowing it would ultimately end worse. Then, one day, the moment I had dreaded finally arrived. My mother called to inform me that something had come up, and she wouldn't be able to return home as planned, instead coming back the following morning. For a brief moment, both Dad and I felt relieved, thinking we wouldn't be disturbed that night. We didn't worry, believing we had until the next morning. However, my mother unexpectedly returned earlier than anticipated, without any warning. In our carelessness, we failed to notice her entering the room. She stood there silently, witnessing the scene, and I knew everything had unraveled. It felt as though her entire world had crumbled before her eyes, and in that instant, everything shattered. I was overwhelmed, unable to speak, while my father remained frozen, unable to come up with an explanation. There was no place for pity or tolerance in the tense and heavy environment of the house. My mother gently left the house, after seeing directly the terrible reality, without saying a word. The home seemed to lose its atmosphere. In addition, everything between my father and I changed, becoming tense and embarrassing beyond description. After all the truths were revealed, we were at a loss for words and actions. There was a tremendous hush over the next few days. My mother did not return home, and eventually she filed for divorce. My parents decided to end the marriage that I once believed was unshakable. The house now stood empty and chilly, leaving me to confront the shattered remains of what was once a joyful family. I felt lost and overwhelmed, unsure of where to go. Torn between my father and mother, I found myself unable to make a choice. My father, who had always been my pillar of strength, had now become the cause of my despair. My mother, who had nurtured and cared for me since childhood, seemed distant, wounded, and burdened by an unhealing pain. It dawned on me that my misguided emotions and weaknesses had led to irreversible consequences. Our family was fractured because of decisions I never imagined would result in such devastation. The damage caused by my mistake touched not only my mother but also my father and me, severing the bonds of love and trust that had once held us together. In the end, I came to realize that boundaries within family relationships must always be honored. Once they are crossed, there is no path to return. Love, no matter how deep, cannot mend mistakes of such magnitude. I am currently at a turning point in my life, uncertain of which direction to take or where I truly belong. I'm unsure if I have the strength to face either my father or my mother, and I can't tell if there's still a place for me in their lives. The family I once cherished has dissolved into a painful memory, and the road ahead feels shrouded in uncertainty. All I know is that I must find a way to confront the consequences of my actions and learn to endure this pain for the rest of my life. I know that after hearing this story, many people will likely criticize me, claiming that I have committed unforgivable acts, but that's perfectly okay with me. I recognize that everyone has their own unique perspective, and I am fully prepared to accept all the judgmental gazes directed my way. The most crucial aspect of this situation is that I have had the courage to confront my own truth, to acknowledge the pain and the consequences that stem from the mistakes I have made. My final piece of advice to those of you who are listening to this story is to always remain vigilant and maintain clear boundaries in any relationship, particularly within the family. Sometimes love and closeness can cloud our judgment, leading us to make poor decisions that we never imagined we would ever consider. Always remember that every action carries consequences, and there are mistakes that cannot be undone. They can only leave behind a trail of pain and damage that may last forever. It is essential to be mindful of this, to protect ourselves and those we care about. Do not allow fleeting emotions to obscure your judgment. Do not let weakness lead you down paths that you will regret for the rest of your life. Uphold boundaries and safeguard love and trust within the family, because once they are shattered, there is no way to restore them. Sometimes we only have one opportunity to protect what is most important, and if we lose it, it will be the most painful experience you will have to endure. We've reached the end of today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you found our content engaging, a thumbs up and sharing it with your loved ones would be much appreciated. Make sure to subscribe to Love 30K Stories and turn on the notification bell for updates on our latest videos. Your support is everything to us. Until next time, take care and goodbye.